The book is Golden Days. The author, one of our very own, Jack McCallum, the Hall of Fame writer and NBA scribe, and of course, accomplished author. You've done it again, Jack. And this one, very, very interesting because you basically use Jerry West as almost a thread from looking back at his days as a Laker to now the Golden State Warriors, of which he was a consultant for them and really involved in a lot of high-level decision-making. What is one thing that you took from Jerry's time as a player and GM for the Lakers that you think really applied to how he was with the Warriors?
I think the thing about Jerry that makes him unusual, he's going into the 80th year of his life. That's no secret. He's remained relevant in this league since 1960. One of the interesting things about him, Maggie, is he still registers as a player somehow. He's been management. He stopped playing in '74. He was coach for 3 years. Then he was basically been management. But somehow when he's around players, he always has a way of registering that he's still a player, not just because he's the logo. Players know that. But to a certain extent, they don't give a crap about that. Jerry comes down, and everyone I talked to about on the Warriors always said something like, Jerry always had something to say. He didn't go back and talk about what he was like when it was in his day. You know, he didn't yell, "Get off my lawn, we could do it this way." You know, he registers young basically because he's smart enough to do it, number one. Number two, he keeps up. The informational flow keeps up with him. He loves today's games, and it's very refreshing to talk to someone who understands how great LeBron is, who understands how great Kevin Durant is, rather than just look at their flaws.
He's also very humble, which I think when some of the older players who have a little more of the get off my lawn feel like they didn't get the credit that they deserved when they were playing, I don't think Jerry feels like he was slighted at all. As a player, I think he feels like he did get the respect and recognition that he deserved.
He did, and I think he knows that. And in a way, this humility that he's had throughout his whole life, kind of part of the reason he says that he doesn't travel with the team, and he never did when he was a general manager, is he doesn't like to be, recognized all that much when the occasion is not about him. If he's making a speech or something, that's fine. You can come up with all the autographs he wants. He does not like it when he's in the tail end of a contingent of a team and everybody's kind of going to him instead of some of the players, because beside Curry, Durant, well, that's a very recognized team, but beside the main guys, Jerry's the most recognized guy. That kind of bugs him a little bit, and for that reason he stays home a lot, which was fortunate. It enabled me to watch Game 4 of the finals with him at his house, which was a great experience.
Yeah, you write about that in the book, and Jerry West, his wife, and his dogs, which is also very interesting. What you write about, you said the modern-day Warriors are in many ways the perfect team, and Curry the perfect player to drive Jerry West nuts. They often play the beautiful game, unselfishly sharing the ball, knowledgeably spacing the floor, moving as one. But the Warriors are also subject to bewildering periods of carelessness when they throw the ball around like kids in a playground dodgeball game. West is looking at you, Steph. In no universe would West choose Curry over Durant. Why is Durant over Curry a no-brainer for West? And do many in the Warriors share that same sentiment?
Well, I think Curry and Durant is an interesting dynamic, which obviously I went into a lot in the book. Kevin Durant is in many ways a throwback. I mean, he's an evolutionary player. He was all the things you want in a basketball player: shooter, passer, defender, court awareness, rebounder, suddenly in this 7-foot frame. But there's a lot of kind of no-nonsense in his book. When I was talking to Durant, he said, Russell Westbrook does this, Steph does the long shots, LeBron has revolutionized the position. I only like to do something to watch the ball go into the basket. There's something very basic and fundamental about Kevin Durant. Jerry, really respects Curry, but Curry will drive Jerry nuts a little bit more. All of a sudden, he'll come down and whip a behind-the-back pass behind, and Jerry will go like that at the same time Curry is. Durant really doesn't do that. The mistakes that Kevin makes are not really the mistakes you make when your game is out of control. They're just done within kind of the flow of the game.
Who is the most important Warrior on this current team?
Well, the way I described it was Durant is that evolutionary player who became all those things you want into a 7-foot body. To me, the one, however, that really changed it, who I think of as a revolutionary player, is Curry. And that's basically because the distance from which he is now shooting accurately completely changes the geometry and physics of the game. One of the people that talked about that with me was Greg Popovich. I expected him to say, off the record, maybe, well, Steph shoots too much, and come on, let's move it in a little bit. And it wasn't. He said, you have to set your defense to stop Steph Curry. That's the first thing you have to do. Then they force you to play small because your big guys can't get out there and guard people on the pick and roll. But guess what? Their small team's better than your small team. So Curry, to me, is the one that made them really different. And he did win a championship without nothing taken away from Kevin Durant, who's probably going to be in the top 20, 25 of all-time players. But they did win a championship without him, and that was mostly because of Steph.
Obviously, team chemistry is so important, and for that, Draymond Green occupies a very unique spot because he's so important to what they do on the court, yet off the court, he can be maddening in a lot of ways. Do you find that the team, this is not meant to be negative, but do they more tolerate him off the court because they realize his importance on the basketball court, or do they genuinely like the Draymond antics, if you will?
The biggest thing that I had wrong going into this book, and I didn't know Draymond, don't cover the league on a full-time basis. The biggest thing that I had wrong was that I thought I would go there and find that Draymond's knucklehead factor was just way too high, and that off the record I would hear whispers of, we got to calm him down. I'm thinking about putting him on the bench, and completely wrong. Completely wrong. Draymond is of utter organic importance to that team. He binds them together. They know, obviously, they need his toughness. Obviously, Curry and Durant, two of the top 5 players in the league, are those more finesse type of players. So Andre Iguodala, so is he. And Draymond gives them that dimension. Interestingly, one of the interesting things I found out from Steve Kerr was that David West, who came to the team, really smart guy, been around, his self-appointed duty was almost to be Draymond's protector, if you will. Because Steve Kerr said something to me. He said, Draymond has to do something that's very hard, and that is walk up to that line but not go over it. And sometimes he's gone over it. But it's a role that no one else in the Warriors have, almost like a hockey enforcer, but yet somebody with a complete game. I mean, Draymond's an all-star, so he's asked to rebound, shoot three-pointers, sometimes engineer the offense, and be the enforcer. I'm trying to think back at somebody really who, Maurice Lucas, but he was more of an inside type of player. So Draymond's pretty unique, and I didn't appreciate that when I started the book.
A lot of this book is about sustained excellence and sustained success. Clearly, when you have Jerry West as the thread that weaves through the book, you're going to find that theme. But do you feel like this Warriors team will have this same run of dominance that perhaps Michael Jordan's Bulls had?
If I'm having to answer yes or no, I'm going to say no, simply because in this day and age, it's just too hard to stay together. I mean, these guys basically, their key parts are signed, I think, through 2019. I think maybe Clay's 2020. So you would look on paper and say, well, I mean, who's going to stop them the next 3 years? Something will happen. Teams break up. Social media causes such a... Ron Adams, the assistant coach of the Warriors, we used to always talk about the bubble. This other social media bubble floats out there all the time. As we know, Kevin Durant has stepped into it. He can't. We
didn't realize how involved he was.
He can't seem to keep out of it. And, we can laugh. Somebody my age can take a look at those pressures that are caused upon by social media and say, I wouldn't get caught in it, except we all tweet. We're all part of that world. We all made mistakes in it, and the stakes that they have when they make a mistake are so much higher.
Okay, with that in mind, you were basically embedded with this team. When you found out that Durant had a fake Twitter account, that he was going back to the Twitter trolls and writing them back, was that the most surprising or least surprising revelation?
It was probably not that surprising. I mean, Kevin, he seems to be not on the court. He seems to be an eternal work in progress off the court, trying to figure out who he is, his place in the league, what the hierarchy is. Forget about the critics. I mean, Kevin Durant is one of the great people in sports, certainly a great player. But, I said in the book, Kevin, you were the second pick in the draft. I think you should have been the first, but you've been an MVP before you got to the Warriors. You're now the Finals MVP. Give up the I don't get no respect thing. We get it. You're a great player. Forget about Oklahoma City, and be complete in a way. Curry, who still looks like a 21-year-old kid, seems to have himself as a person kind of figured out more completely. And I'm sure it'll happen to KD. I'm sure it will.
Okay, it hasn't happened yet, though. He is still very sensitive. As you said, a work in progress. And the fans were chanting MVP for Steph when they got their rings in the opening game of this season. In some ways, do you think deep down that might bother Kevin Durant? He is the Finals MVP.
I think that probably bothered him, but I think it's also, I mean, at some level, Kevin Durant is also, every time that the subject would come up, you know, he would kind of say well, it is Steph's team. You know, I mean, the team was created, the paradigm was created before KD got there. Having said that, the dichotomy is, despite what I said about Curry as a revolutionary player, he's not a better player than Kevin Durant. He can't have the impact on a game that Kevin Durant has simply because of his height and his ability to score, posting up, isolation, breaking a man down, shooting off the dribble whenever. So it is those two trying to figure out whose team it is going forward. That's obviously going to be a key thing for the Warriors.
How much does it matter to the two of them?
Well, they say that it doesn't.
What did you find?
I think it probably does. I mean, they're two very smart kids, so they know they have to say the right thing about it. But I've never been around a team that I can think of when you cannot truly define whose team it is. It was Michael's team. It was Magic's team when they had Kareem. It was Tim Duncan's team even when Tony Parker and Manu were outscoring him. I mean, that's just general. It's LeBron's team, even when he and D. Wade were unbelievable. The one year Miami won the championship, Shaq and D. Wade together, it was D. Wade's team. Kobe and Shaq, I'm going back too much history for you, but no, Kobe and Shaq's, you know, it was Shaq's team first year. Well, then Kobe came on, and I think they eventually broke apart because they couldn't figure out whose team it was, and they're a pretty good model. I think that Steph and KD are different from Shaq and Kobe, a little more self-aware, a little less outward ego, but that's kind of the model you have to look at going forward.
That's not good. Yeah. That's not a great model, even though it was very successful.
But they won. They won 3, and in this day and age, to win 3 in a row, and that's what I said in the book. I said, as great as we think the Warriors are, and they are, here's their biggest challenge right now. They got to win 2 in a row. You know, they got to win 2.
You mentioned about figuring out who's sort of the alpha and who's going to be the alpha. They're all alphas, right? But the relationship between Durant and Westbrook is one that's still very fascinating to people. You touch on this in the book when you write, a lot of people, there was a feeling throughout the club that KD needed to be de-Westbrooked, that he had brought bad habits from his years at OKC. Do you think Durant views it that way?
I'm sure he does not. Well, I answered that too quickly. Kevin Durant early in this, first of all, early in the season. I mean, I think by the time December and January, they figured out Kevin Durant's a pretty damn good player. But they were talking about this constant, you know, not the ball sticking, not moving the ball, not making the right cuts. If you watch the Warriors, to me, they're the best screening. That's what I appreciate the most about them. They're the best screening team I've ever seen. The offense didn't work like that in OKC. And part of this thing about being D. Westbrook was the Warriors' own arrogance that we are the only ones that play the beautiful game. You know, we play the beautiful game. We know how to play. But very early on, Kevin Durant said a few things that would indicate that himself. There is a different feeling here. He usually made it more psychological, you know, this feeling of unity and everybody's all together. It's a very real thing. He never really related to it on the court. But I do think that in the first month or so that he did get an eye-opening of the way they do things. And he's such a fantastic ball player, such a smart kid on the court, that I think he picked it up pretty seamlessly. Because that was early in the year when they had this feeling about taking some of the OKC, you know, bad habits away from him.
Steve Kerr, obviously a very interesting person, not just as a basketball player or coach, but just his entire life. He's made it no secret that he has been very critical of the president as a team. The Warriors were disinvited to the White House by the president on Twitter. How often does this team talk about politics amongst themselves, or do they just answer questions when the media happens to?
Well, it's different, I think, between the team and Steve. When I would see Steve during the year, and I've known Steve a long time, and part of this, the hard thing for me was every time I went to see Steve, the physical pain that this guy was going through. I mean, you'd be talking to him, and he'd be going like this, and I felt I could talk to Steve for 4 hours, but I'd kind of cut it off, and we had this joke that every time I talked to him for 20 minutes, and we talked about Trump for 10 minutes, and then we talked about basketball. You can easily get into it with Steve, with Mike Brown, with Ron Adams. The players, I don't think, really deal with it as much. However, they will definitely talk about it. And Steve said something to me funny, I don't think I put it in the book early in the year. I said, well, I mean, look, I feel the same way you do, but what if you had a team that someone out there, the 10th or the 11th, 12th guy, happened to vote for Donald Trump or was more conservative? What would you do? Would you tailor your message? And Steve said, I don't know, but I do know that's not a problem with this team. That's not a problem with this team. Whether or not it was the result of being in San Francisco, the Bay Area, but they just happen to have a bunch of guys united in that front. But I don't think people should get the idea that it's a constant beehive of political activity. But a guy like Steve and Pop, the way they run their teams, it's really surprising to a lot of people when Pop spoke out. The way they run their teams, they depend on unity, they depend on people pulling together, they depend on discipline. And I think what drove them nuts about it was that they didn't see that from this leader. That as a coach and these values you're trying to instill and the way you're trying to lead your organization, and it just forced them, honestly, to speak out when I think sometimes they didn't even want to. They knew that there was going to be some kind of backlash. They knew, hey, I should just coach my damn team and shut up once in a while. But events just forced them kind of to do it. And it was a very interesting year from that perspective.
And it's great in the book how you go back to the days of Jerry West playing and the Vietnam War going on, and just how the team talking through the civil rights era, and just how those teams were also dealing with a lot of political turmoil. Jack, thank you. The book's fantastic. Golden Days is the title. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Maggie.